Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Teacher Talks. Today, I am absolutely elated to connect with a very dear friend and colleague all the way back from Houston, Texas, in our Texas Southern days. Shout out to all the proud Texas Southern Tigers out there. This is Devondra Banks. She is an extraordinary human being, an amazing vocalist, an educator, an extraordinary caregiver, and author of several books, a collection of poetry, and a series of children books that I'm so excited to talk to her about this work and what she's been inspired by. We have given this episode a subtitle called Share Your Story. And I think what Devondra offers us today is amazing, not only as a performer and then educator and then mother, but also as an author, and the way that she's been able to use words to share her story and her passion for the arts and education. For those of you that are tuning in for the first time, Teacher Talks is an opportunity to connect with colleagues and friends from all over the world about the transformative power of arts and education. So this whole venture really of trying to connect using technology to talk to people about arts and education stemmed from the pandemic hitting the Pacific Northwest. I have the great privilege of serving as the Director of Music Education and Orchestral Activities at Seattle Pacific University, go Falcons. And the university appropriately sort of shut down when the pandemic hit, and I wanted to find a way that I could still stay connected with my students, even though we are physically distancing ourselves appropriately to try to quell the effects of the coronavirus. We wanted to stay connected, intellectually and spiritually and emotionally. And so technology has given us that gift. And what I thought was going to be just a short venture of maybe just a few weeks in the spring quarter has now turned into, I think this is our 34th episode. So 34 weeks later, I'm still reaching out and connecting to people and having these conversations. And I couldn't be more grateful for this platform for us to talk about the significance of art in our lives, the importance of imagination and creativity, and particularly education, as we're not just learning, but we're learning from each other and teaching each other what the world looks like from different perspectives, how people are experiencing everything that's going on in the world differently. So if you're joining for the first time, welcome. And know that this conversation is not just between the two people that are on the screen. There is a chat feature. We are live streaming on Facebook and on YouTube, and I strongly encourage you to put in any comments or questions that you have as you're watching. I hope and I know that you will be inspired by many things that are said, but particularly by Devondra's journey and the things that she's producing right now. I'll provide links when there are opportunities for you to go explore some of the materials that we're talking about, but most of all, please don't hesitate to join our conversation. We definitely want to hear from you and have your contributions as we're going along. So a little bit more formalities as we're just kind of giving some people time to tune in. So this is sponsored specifically by a student organization at Seattle Pacific University called the Falcon Feathers. It stands for Future Educators in the Arts Transforming Human Experience and Realities. And I'm so grateful to work with those music education students and art education students at SPU. And again, welcome. This is not exclusively for future art educators. This is for anyone that is passionate about using their voice to promote art and education in the world. Again, thank you for joining us today, and thank you again and again to my dear friend Devondra for giving us this time. I'm so grateful to have you with us. Before we start, I wanted to just take a brief moment to start in prayer and reflection. Whatever prayer means to you, however you participate in it, if you would just join us in this moment to be able to reflect and share our thanksgiving for this opportunity to connect. Lord, thank you again and again for the incredible resources and talents that you bless us with. I am so grateful to be your servant and to have friends and colleagues that are servants to you in your divine will. Lord, thank you for Devondra and the incredible things that she's doing, the lives that she's touching and transforming through the art that she shares, not only her musical gifts, but her gifts of words that you have blessed her with. God, thank you for this time. I pray that you put an anointing over it, protect all of the technology and the connections that we have so that the words that we share can go out to others and inspire them to do similar work, to transform lives through art and education. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So Devondra, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to and what you are doing lately.
Well, I am a music educator. I always start with that. I'm a mom. I'm active in my church, just trying to stay busy, trying to fulfill all of the things, all of what I feel I identify as my purpose. I've been teaching for about 15 years now. I have been writing books for about 3 years now. And one of my greatest joys is being a mom. I have a 7-year-old son who is autistic. And here lately, everything that I do has been surrounding his education and just trying to raise him and rear him to be the best little human being I can possibly get him to be or encourage him to be.
I love it, and I'm particularly interested in because I know that some of my students share this with you. Could you talk a little bit about kind of what you were doing as an undergrad, and then how you gravitated towards music education? Because for people that don't know you that are watching, you have an extraordinary voice and great musical
Yeah.
talent. And that's kind of how we interacted. Is we were both studying music at Texas Southern, and I still remember seminar days, Thursday afternoons, 1 to 2, and we would perform, for each other and give feedback and such. And so I remember getting to hear you as a vocalist and see you in the choir and sort of see you that way. But then, you stepped into this role of being a music educator. So what was it like for you as an undergrad, sort of navigating music as a discipline and a career?
It was really tough for me, actually. A lot of people don't know that, but I struggled quite a bit. I had the talent, but it was really hard for me to really commit myself to the process of learning all the facets of music education. I knew that I loved children, I knew that I loved music, and I knew that I wanted to mesh the two. I just didn't know in what capacity I wanted to do it. So I figured, okay, why not just, get this music education track going? I'll do that, and then I'll see where it leads me. At a certain point, I struggled with theory. And that was really discouraging for me. I know a lot of students may identify with that. It was at one point I was kind of like, why do I need to do all of this? I just want to sing. Like, like I know how to read music, but why do I need to analyze chords? Why do I need to do that? I mean, now I realize why, but it was really tough for me. And so there were some semesters that I struggled, but then I do appreciate having that sense of community at Texas Southern University, having professors and also having fellow colleagues and students who kind of push you along and motivate you and encourage you. And so it got easier. Also, I don't know if you remember, you may have graduated by then, I'm not sure, but I transferred to Sam Houston State University. And so, yeah, transferred to Sam Houston State University, and that's where I decided to continue my degree. Thinking back on it now, I should have stayed at Texas Southern University. I appreciate smaller, niche music education department, because going into Sam Houston State, it was like, whoa, this is a totally new arena.
That's up in Huntsville, right?
Yeah, that's in Huntsville.
Were you commuting, or did you move up to Huntsville?
I moved to Huntsville. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so that's where I finished school. And I decided to do music education, but then I also started to realize I had a love for watching growth and development happen. And so I minored in early childhood development and psychology because I wanted to do more studying about the development of children, how they start learning, what is this process like, what do I need to do as an educator to make sure they're getting everything that they need to learn and grow, not just academically, but socially, emotionally, all of that. So after that, my first job was teaching private school and teaching little ones, pre-K. So my college journey was interesting, but I made it. It's one of those things where they talk about the race not being given to the swift. Yeah. So, but yeah, so undergrad, it was interesting, but I always tell people, it's your journey. Don't compare it to anyone else's. Which is try to identify what it is exactly you want to do and go for it.
I really appreciate the fact that you took on these other studies in early childhood education and psychology, something that I'm struggling with right now. And I try to caution myself because you've known me long enough. You know that I am loud and not shy and get very passionate about what I talk about. And I
Mhm.
have learned that a lot of people misunderstand that for either sort of judgment or some sort of condemnation when I'm questioning things. And I love to question things. I love to
Yeah.
challenge things. As you probably remember, being, you know, a white kid at Texas Southern, like I don't like systems. I like to challenge them. And and anyway, I say all that because, you know, my role now, which I very intentionally stepped into, is training future educators, particularly
Mhm.
training future music educators. And
Yeah.
something that I experienced when I was an undergrad, and then stepping into this role of teaching other students, I felt like I was trained to be a good musician, but I
Mm.
wasn't really trained to be a good educator. That
Mm.
all of my courses and everything I was doing was a lot about music pedagogy. So I was learning how to teach, but for
Yeah.
me, I found a big distinction between a teacher and an educator. You
Yes.
know, teachers instruct. And so I knew how to give instruction in music. And again, you know, I ain't trying to throw shade at anybody. Like you know, Dr. Mack, like I loved her. Like we had
Mhm.
incredible faculty at Texas Southern that taught us a
Yeah.
lot. But the more I learned, the more I tried to excel. Once I got out of my undergrad, I realized I've really just focused on teaching music. I don't know anything about human learning and about psychology and the things that are going to make me a great educator. And I was frustrated for years, and it's not an exaggeration.
Mhm.
I don't think, as my mom and my partner like to say, I don't think that I hid in graduate school, but that's what my family likes to accuse me of, is that
Mhm.
I just sort of stayed in school for a really long time because there was more and more that I wanted to know. And I ran into the difficulty of, you know, you don't know what you don't know, and sort of pointing fingers
Yeah.
at, I guess I'll study this, I guess I'll study that, and realizing very, very late in life what I was really passionate about was studying education. And
Mm.
even though I had been a music education major, the focus was on music. And I'm curious if that was something that you realized. Again, I don't want to like condemn music education colleagues or but I do think that it's flawed. I do think from my experience that music ed degrees focus so much on music and so little on education and actually teaching human beings. Did you feel the same way or what was your experience?
I did. I felt like I was learning the technique. I was learning
Hmm.
how to teach the technique and all the mechanics. But I was like, how do you connect with the student in order
Yeah.
to get there? And it was Professor Butler who told me something. I think it was in Woodwin's class, and he was talking about some of the things that we may encounter. He said, you may have a kid who just is not going to do anything in your classroom.
Yeah.
And he told me to always remember that no child ever wakes up and walks into your classroom and says, I'm going to go make Miss Banks's life heck today. I'm just going to
Mm,
go tear it all up. There's always a reason. He used to always
mm,
say that sometimes he would have to feed his students. Sometimes he would have to let them go and take a nap. And I'm thinking, what? That's
yeah.
ridiculous. Like, but it wasn't until I started teaching in Title I schools and HISD, and I was like, okay, like this is a real thing. There are some kids who could care less about the content in front of them, and they're wondering where they're going to get their next meal from, or their parents have been fighting all night, or it goes so deep. And I remember what he said, and so I started working with like community groups before I finished school, and that's
Yeah.
what really ignited that. And I said, okay, it's deeper than just me teaching technique. It's deeper than me teaching the lines and spaces. I need to know how to connect to these children, and I need to know how you said be an educator versus a teacher. I need to really dig in there and make sure that I'm giving these kids everything that they need, not just what I have on a piece of paper at the end of the day.
Well, and it's so funny because you know you bring up psychology, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to do with my students, and I'm by no means a psychologist, but
Mhm.
those basic principles of human engagement and learning that I feel are really important. We talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you
Mhm.
know? I mean,
Yeah.
and I learned that in my like general psychology class at Texas Southern. It was never brought up in my music ed classes.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing it in my general psych class, like my social science elective that I had to take, and them talking about it and sort of making those loose connections of, yeah, if my students, as you're pointing out so eloquently, if they don't have shelter, if they don't have food, if they're
Yeah.
worried about that, I don't think they care about playing in tune. Like that's
Exactly.
just not a priority. And
Yeah.
ironically, I had just brought up the sleepy student in one of my classes this past week that I said, why is it that we force these sort of social norms and expectations for learning, right? Like
Mhm.
this is how you learn. And
Yeah.
we talk so much about differentiation and accommodations, but we don't hold sight of just sort of the basic premise of where you need to be psychologically and mentally to be able to learn. And those are two different things in terms of cognitive development and social emotional development. Where do these human beings in front of me need to be? And I sort of challenged the students and I said, I was that kid. I got in trouble for falling asleep in class all the time, particularly in middle school. And I looked at my students in college and I said, let me ask you a very simple question. Why do people fall asleep? And they kind of looked at me, assuming it was a trick. And someone finally sort of sheepishly raised their hand and they said, because they're tired. And I was like, exactly. Falling
Yeah.
asleep in someone's class is not something they are doing to you. As you pointed out, they're not like, today's the day. I'm just going to irritate Miss Banks because I'm going to fall asleep on purpose. No, you fall asleep because you're tired. So
Yeah.
why don't I ask that question? Why are you tired?
Yes.
And let you take a nap. I was infamous for having this big green couch that I got from Goodwill when I was teaching high school, and it was terribly comfortable, to be brutally honest. It was a very comfortable couch. And
Uh-huh.
and I had the same thing, and I had a drawer with just snacks. I'd go to Sam's Club and stock up on snacks. I was teaching in a Title I school in Central Texas, and it was amazing to me. And although, forgive me for going so far so quickly in this conversation, but anytime I have a platform and a way to wedge this in, I like to talk about it. The social stigmas that get leaned into that affect students learning, I remember distinctly, and I think I've told this story before on Teacher Talk, so forgive me for those of you that are watching and experiencing the redundancy. But I remember I had a not so shy student kind of drag one of her friends into my office one time. And she said, will you just ask him? Just ask him. It's not a big deal. And I could see terror on this poor girl's face, who was not one of my students. This was just a friend of one of my students. And I'm kind
Mhm.
of staring at them. I'm typing my email and just staring at them. And I'm going, what's going on? And she's like, just ask him. And this girl is just petrified. And so finally, my student speaks up and she goes, do you have any tampons? And I said, yeah, of course. And I opened my drawer. I had every kind you needed. I had maxi pads. I had tampons. I had whatever you needed. And I
Mhm.
stocked up on that. Now, to give credit where credit is due, that's what happens when you grow up with a single mother. Because my mother was not shy about anything. She used to send me into Kroger to grab what she needed, extra absorbency. Get this one. I'm like, you got it, mom. It just wasn't a big deal. Like,
Yeah.
a woman having a period is a part of life. And why would we stigmatize that? And I
Exactly.
remember several of my students sort of knowing that and seeing it and understanding that I was happy to sort of offer that. I had razors and I had soap and I had like all kinds of cleaning products and stuff, and I just had it in my office. And I remember someone at some point, can't remember whom it was, but someone at some point was like, that's so awesome that you do that. And I was like, wait a minute, that should not be celebrated as something that's unique. This
Yeah.
should be something that everybody provides. That, like, why would we stigmatize this? Because I can guarantee if this poor girl is worried about her period, she's not learning. If
Yeah.
she's worried about what you're going to think and what people are going to say and where she's going to get what she needs, she's not learning, and that should be the problem. And if it's just as simple as we're just going to have these available, or we're just going to have, the fact that, God bless, this child has to, like, how am I going to have this conversation with my male teacher so I can get a pass to go to the nurse, and I'll just have to wait for lunch, and so she's sitting in pain for 30 minutes in class, and like, or having to lie to a teacher and experience deceit because she's got to say she's going to the bathroom but she's really going to sneak off to the nurse. Like, why are we doing that to children?
Yeah.
Why?
And the anxiety of it all.
Yes.
Yeah. That's tough. You're right. Yeah, you're
I've
absolutely
never
right.
understood that. And I really do feel, I tell people all the time, I went into school, um interestingly enough, I don't know if you knew this about my journey. So I actually didn't graduate Texas Southern with a music ed degree.
Mm,
I decided that I didn't want to student teach. at the time, I was being kind of selfish because I thought I'm not going to work for a year and not get paid. Because I was like, I'm going to be in a school for 40 hours a week for a
Legit.
semester, and no, that's not me. And I ended up I got my bachelor's degree. I shouldn't say just. I mean, I got my bachelor's degree in composition. I just did a composition recital and graduated with comp, and decided to go on and ended up doing in Texas, because I know there's people from different states watching. In Texas, you can do your alternative certification, and so I did that, and I got hired teaching, and then had an emergency certificate because I had degrees in music, so I was highly qualified, and then got my certificate while I was teaching in public schools. And I'll never forget being in the classroom for the first time and being so confident because I was a professional musician. I was gigging every weekend. I knew everything I needed to know about music,
Yeah.
and knowing really nothing about education, and having to learn how to be an educator while I was in the classroom. And that was, I mean, the greatest education that I had, because it didn't matter how many method books I knew about and how many strategies I had to get a kid to put high two on the D string to make F sharp. I mean, none of that mattered once you were in the classroom. And Bob Phillips, who's an amazing string pedagogue, I've stolen this from him because I love it. One of the big pieces of advice he gives teachers, he says, teach the human beings in front of you.
Yeah.
And that is what I struggled with the most, is realizing there are human beings in front of me, and I'm not supposed to be teaching the kids that I want, the talent that I want them to have, and the program that I want to have. I'm not supposed to teach the kids that I had 3 years ago. Oh, do you remember 3 years ago how good they were? I'm not
Yeah.
supposed to teach those kids. I'm supposed to teach the human beings right in front of me. And the more I realized that I am an educator that just happens to teach music,
Mhm.
that I feel like I served my students so much better.
Absolutely.
What was it like for you?
oh
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I was saying I agree 100%. That's very true.
What was it like for you making those transitions? Because those are pretty big. Because if I remember correctly, so you're saying you were teaching pre-K at a private school, which has its, I mean, private schools in and of themselves are their own beast. They have their own idiosyncrasies.
Yeah.
And then from there, you transitioned to being a general music teacher at an elementary school.
I actually taught voice in Spring ISD at Duquesne High School.
Oh,
Actually,
wow.
so in Spring ISD, you could teach, if you were teaching privately, you could teach at two high schools, two middle schools at the same time. And you just commute to wherever you wanted to teach,
Wow.
wherever they contracted you. So at the time, I was at Duquesne High School, Westfield High School, I think Bammel and Bailey Middle School, all at one
Wow.
time. So I was just, going around teaching. I was pregnant with David at the time, so I was still kind of trying to feel around about what exactly I wanted to do
Yeah.
with my degree, what I wanted to do. Um, and still, because I knew what my purpose was, I just didn't really have a plan. I knew I needed a job, but I'm
Mm,
like, okay, I want a career in this. I want to make sure that I have a career, that I want longevity. And then I also want to make sure I'm fulfilling my purpose. So I had all of that in mind, but it worked for what it was. It worked for the time.
mm.
And then after I had David is when I ventured into the classroom in HISD. That was a huge transition because I spent a year at home with my son.
Wow.
And then going into the classroom, I was just like, okay, this should be a cakewalk. I'm a mom now. I've taught private school. I got this. I didn't have it. So I taught at really, really rough school in HISD. They were on the verge of closing down, and the principal
Oh,
at the time said if we could get a good music teacher in here, I feel like if they could connect through the arts, then maybe we can save this school.
wow.
So we had a plan. I taught piano. I taught choir. We had a show choir. I did Orff. I did everything that I could possibly think of to offer variety. I didn't have any instruments. I had to call and beg and say, hey, do you have extra here, extra there? But I made it work.
Mm.
And those kids' scores started going up. I was pulled in to teach
Wow.
review. So I was making up songs about sight words. I mean, I literally took music and made it a vehicle to teach everything because that's what I had been doing in private school anyway.
Wow.
All of my little kids, because that's how I learned when I was younger. I made everything into a song. So I said, if I can take music and use it as a vehicle to reach these kids, no matter what, whether it's turning on the radio when they come in and them hearing a song that they identify with. I think at the time the song Whip and Nene was a hot thing. So I would pick it up and say, come on in, let's get started, and it worked. It worked. I stayed there for 2 years as long as I could because it was tough. While I do it, it was really heavy. It was one of those schools where CPS was constantly in and out of the door all the time. And I did it as long as I could, and then I moved on to my next assignment. And that was a fine arts magnet school at HISD. So less problems, more support, more equipment. And that was a beautiful experience. And then after that is when I transitioned out of the classroom. But my experience, I can say from private school into public school, I was very spoiled. I was a teacher, and I was doing what I could and I had everything handed to me. But when I stepped into that classroom for the first day in HISD, that's when I realized, no, I don't at all. But my experience in HISD taught me that I can teach anyone. All I have to do is make sure that I'm dealing, like you said, teach the human being in front of you. As long as I'm identifying them as an individual and I am giving them what they need. A lot of times we think, I can't meet everyone's individual needs in this classroom of 30 kids. But you can. All it takes is giving them a special good morning. Or like sometimes I would do a fist bump with certain kids or so let me backtrack just a little bit. In the process of me getting certified and doing early childhood education, I got certified in 2 programs. One was called Love and Logic. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Love and Logic and Conscious Discipline. I don't know if you heard of any of those 2, but those are 2 great programs for educators, whether you're teaching music, whether you're going to be a school counselor, doesn't matter, whatever you teach. I feel like every teacher should go through those 2 programs. It teaches you to identify the child as their own, their own single person and not just as a number in your classroom. It also teaches you not to take their behavior personally and not to create power struggles. So, like I said before, no child wakes up in the morning to say, I'm about to go turn it up at, at school. I'm about to go turn her classroom inside out. It's like I'm trying to think one tactic was giving them a personalized greeting. So you can say, okay, your choices today are, you can give me the butterfly, you can give me an air hug like this, or you can blow out my birthday candle, or whatever. It gives you like a different greeting, or it could be like a handshake, a personalized handshake. And so whenever my kids would come to my door, that's how they would greet me. So some people would choose a butterfly, some people would choose the kid and play kick, like we would make up different things. So it just let them know that I see you. I'm seeing you as this little person who's walking into my classroom and not just a number that I have to give a grade to or that I have to teach, or you're not just a job to do. You are a person in my class and I care about how you're feeling today. It goes beyond me just saying, okay, what line is this? What space is this? So those are 2 programs that I would absolutely, please tell your administrators to get that training for your campuses. If there are any teachers on here listening right now, because it's life-changing. It allows you to see education through a totally different lens.
I put a link for Love and Logic. What was the other one you said?
Conscious Discipline.
Conscious Discipline.
Yeah. And I know that one of them has like puppets. It focuses on the social and emotional growth of the student.
Nice.
So
now, where did you end up doing this training? Was this something that was offered at Sam Houston, or?
I actually went through both of those trainings when I was teaching pre-K.
At the private school.
Yeah, at the private school. But
Gotcha.
honestly, I used them, but I didn't have to use them in the magnitude in which I had to use them in HISD. HISD, I had to pull my book back out and say, okay,
Right.
let's revisit all of this stuff because I think I need it. So, like for example, one of the things that I think is Love and Logic talks about is creating a safe place, a literal safe place in your classroom.
Yeah.
So for me in my music classroom, I had really pretty bean bags. I had some squishy toys like stress balls, puzzles, because sometimes a child may have a meltdown, and I swore to myself that I would never put a child out of my classroom. That wasn't
Mm.
an option for me. It wasn't a solution for me. So I would try to keep the kids inside because a lot of them were trying to get outside the door anyway. So, they would act out on purpose because they wanted to go to the office. Any attention is good attention. So I decided I'm going to reverse this. So here, have a seat in this safe place. I want you to kind of, calm down, relax, get your thoughts together. And then when you're ready, you can come back over and engage in the lesson with us. And it always worked. It just relieved that power struggle to say, I'm in charge, I'm
Yeah.
the teacher. Because if you have to say that, like, are you really in charge?
Yeah.
So, I know who gets the paycheck in the classroom, but the child needs to know that they are still welcome, no matter what. So if you have a bad day, I have bad days too. But what we're not going to do is always run away from our problems. Let's solve it together. Let's work together. And then let's come together again so we can revamp and get back in here and learn this lesson. So it was my way of communicating to my kids that I don't care what you're going through. Like your problems, I'm not telling you to leave them at the door. What I am saying is that we all have problems and we can all work through it together. So I feel like that's an important message for kids to know.
Amen. You had me laughing because, man, you took me back to my childhood hearing someone tell me, see what we're not going to do.
Right.
I stood up a little bit on that. I said, ooh, I haven't heard that phrase in a while.
Yeah.
It's funny. I remember, obviously, secondary school is very different. Um, and it's so interesting how everybody develops their own classroom management strategies. Doesn't matter how much you read, and it's so in tune with who you are personally and how you were raised. I remember distinctly one of my high schoolers. They were worried because I was agitated in a rehearsal or something, and I could hear them. It's so funny to me. I don't know why kids think that teachers can't hear magically. I mean, I hear everything they say. You
Right.
always hear what they say. So they're talking to each other, and they go, I think Mr. Hansen's really upset. And this girl leans over, she goes, no, he's not upset. He hasn't started apologizing yet. And I heard her, and I was like,
Oh, wow.
what? What was that? And so, I did the typical thing, which, makes everybody's butt clench. She said, what did you say? And everybody just
Uh-huh.
fell. And I said, no, what did you say? I heard you say something, and I promise you, I'm not upset. And they were like, well, I was just letting my stand partner know that you weren't upset. And I was like, yeah, but how do you know I'm not upset? You said something. She goes, well, because when you're really upset, you start apologizing. And I said, what do you mean? And Devondra, I almost lost it because I realized this is what I do. She goes, well, when you get really mad, you go, I'm sorry. We all had the opportunity to talk while I was teaching. I'm sorry. I didn't know. And I was like, oh my gosh, I totally do that. That was like, that's when they knew they were pushing the buttons. I'd go, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that I gave you permission to.
Yeah.
So it's so funny to me. So it reminds me of that, of the mentors I had and the people that said, see, what we're not going to do today is
Yeah.
act like you forgot the rules of this class.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Now, do you think I was just glancing at these because I'm not familiar. We had, I don't know if you used this. I think this was district specific. So we used a merchant tree, and because there's so many strategies out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I like about, particularly, I'm just glancing at the Love and Logic. I love how sequenced this is and the strategies that it provides. And are these sort of designed for primary school? Am I correct in assuming that, or do you think this would work at any age level?
I think they are mainly for primary school, but if
Yeah.
you like I've used it in high school, but I'm just not as like I'm not doing butterflies at the door.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
give them a picture greeting like, hey, what's up? Just get them on their level is the whole idea. Get on their level and
Nice.
connect. And so with high school, if they would ask me, or I would ask them like, what's your favorite food? Like we would have those moments to talk about what's your favorite food, what's your favorite ice cream, or oh, have y'all heard about that new spot here or there? You know, just because I had a student to see me at the grocery store once, and they were like, "What are you doing at Walmart?" And I was like, "I go to Walmart too." Like it's like they don't think we're human. They don't
I
think
know.
that we connect at all. You know, so just little things like that.
I
So
love this.
I guess that would be the difference of connecting with primary school. You can do all the little tangible things
Mhm.
and get puzzles and crayons, and high school, not so much, you know, because they think it's immature. But what I've learned, I don't care what grade level I've ever taught, they all like stickers. So I know that in strings class, Ms. Lundy used to give us stickers for our strings assignments, and I was just like, "Where's my gold star?"
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it could still work for middle school and high school. You just have to modify it a bit.
Well, I've got these links in here for anyone that wants to follow these. I think this is brilliant. And I want to make sure, time is going so fast. I wanted to make sure that we got to talk a little bit about your books and what you've authored and
Sure.
what that journey was like. So when did you start publishing and how I think what I'm most interested in, do you feel that this was something sort of separate, this calling that you had to be writing, or do you see your writing as an artistic expression? Does it connect to you musically in any way? Like, how did you make that transition to being an author? When did it all take place?
I actually started writing in elementary school. I went through a very traumatic experience when I was younger, and I went to therapy for it.
Mm,
And one of the things that the therapist said to do was write down how you feel. And so I would write it down, and I would keep it in a journal my mom bought for me. And every once in a while, I would let her read it. That was one thing
mm,
that, you know, I would never keep a secret, but it was just, you know, my thoughts and how I felt. And then she would read it. And my mom also wrote poetry. And she told me, you know, Devondra, this is really good. You know, she was like, always hold on to your poetry, always keep these things, but keep writing. And so as I got older, I would write in school, and my teachers were like, wow, this is really good. And so I guess I just kind of noticed that I had a gift when it came to writing, but I didn't really know what to do with it besides write down my thoughts or turn in a paper and get a grade for it.
hmm,
And so in college, I met Dr. Christopher Harris, and I was still doing the same thing, writing down my thoughts. And he picked up a piece of paper one day that I left at his apartment, and he was like, this is really good. I would like to turn this into a song. And I'm like, what? I was kind of taken aback. I'm like, why? But he was like, this is beautiful. It will be so beautiful. It was set to music. And so that kind of gave me a bit of a push. And so I just kept writing. He would call me and say, hey, I need a text for this. I would write it just off of a whim, and then he would take it and set it to music. And so we just kept doing that for a while, or either he would send me music and I would say, okay, this inspires me to feel this way. I'm going to write about this. So it just kind of worked that way. And then plus I had a whole collection of stuff that I had been writing over the years. And my fiance, at the time he was my boyfriend, he was like, you know, why don't you do something with this stuff? And
hmm.
so I looked into it, and I thought about putting together all of my poetry in one book. But I didn't know, again, I had no direction, didn't know what I wanted to do with it. So what I did was I picked about, I guess it's about 35 of my best poems that I thought I had written. And I thought about like some of the experiences that I've been through my life. One thing that I've always told myself is that I never want, no matter how bad an experience is, I never want any of my experiences to be in vain. So I want my testimony to be able to reach other people. And then maybe if I share what I'm going through, whether it's in the form of poetry, song, me talking about it, maybe they won't have to bump their head as hard,
Hmm.
or maybe they can know that they're not alone. And so I took those poems, and I wanted them all to represent love, loss, logic, and just life in general, life experience. And so I just took them, put them in a book. I got them published, and picked a cover
Wow.
for it. And it's been selling like hotcakes. So I'm really, really excited because it's just something that I had as a goal that I wanted to do. It is an expression for me. I don't know if I necessarily want to call it an artistic expression, but it's literally me putting my heart on paper, to
Mm.
get whatever's going on in my head and get it out and put it on a piece of paper. Sometimes it comes out as a poem with a pretty bow. Sometimes it's not so eloquent, but that's what it is. And so that's why I named the book Gems and Debris. Some of the things are good. Some of them are debris. I just look at it, it's just a whole bunch of stuff. But those poems are the gems and all of the debris that I've gone through in my life. Those are the things or the jewels that I have chosen to kind of keep close to me, the life lessons that I kind of hold near and dear to my heart to keep me going. So sometimes I take my book and open it up and read a poem to say, okay, you got this. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's definitely expression, but I never intended for it to be artistic. Christopher Harris kind of changed it into that. So
And I should say you also have a podcast, Strands of Pearls, right?
yes, I do. I forgot to mention that. Yeah, so I do so many things actually, but yeah, I do have a podcast, and that's kind of like along the same premise of my writing. Um, it's me sharing my stories,
Yeah.
or me kind of giving advice. I found myself at one point in my life, as my mom would say, casting my pearls to swine. I would always be giving advice to people who would come to me with their problems, but they really didn't want help. And so I found myself kind of spending more than what I had available of myself, giving all this advice and saying this is what you should do, and then getting frustrated when people didn't do what I advised them to do when they still chose to do the latter. So I say, well, you know what? Let me create a platform where I can talk about these things. I can talk about being in an abusive relationship and what an unhealthy relationship looks like. I can talk about um, being surrounded by toxic people, or I can
Mm.
talk about uh, being rooted in your faith and you finding your own purpose in life. Things like that. Things that I feel like the younger generation needs to hear. I mean, and some of us as well. Some people are still trying to feel their ways around through life. It's difficult. It can be tough sometimes. And so I just decided to create that platform to just encourage people that it's tough, but it's not impossible. Like you can still do it. You can still get through these speed bumps and these wooded areas in life that we may come across sometimes. So that's my primary goal with my podcast is just to inspire
I
and
love
share my
that.
experiences. Yeah.
And so we're just going to keep adding it on because we're talking about the poetry that you've published and the podcast, but you also done this whole series of children's books.
Yes.
So where did that come after David was born specifically, or was that something that you were already doing?
That's something that came way after David. Um,
Wow. Okay.
yeah, I was buying all of these books. He loves Dr. Seuss. And I also have a love for books that are poetically written, like they rhyme,
Hmm.
but they still tell a story. And so I was like, these books are great. I'm a big Dr. Seuss fan. But then I felt like there was something missing. Like I was searching for different content and I couldn't really find it. And so my mom was like, why don't you just write it? And I was like, oh, why don't I just write it? So I basically kept writing poetry, but then I just put it in the form of a children's book. So there's a book for African American children. They're positive affirmations for African American children. I feel like that's something that's needed for all children. But right now, with the way the world is right now, specifically brown kids, they need to know you are beautiful. You are your ancestors' wildest dreams. Like, so it's just a book full of that, of just all this goodness for African American children. There's a book about children with Down syndrome and telling them how special they are.
Mm.
There's a book called The Families on Sage Street, where it talks about different family dynamics, whether you live with your mom only or your grandparents, or maybe your aunt and uncle, or if you have mom and dad at home. It talks about the different labels of family, but it doesn't matter what that dynamic looks like in your house. It's about the love that's shared within those walls. So just putting content out there that I feel like children need, um, or books that I would have liked to read when I was younger. That's the content that I'm trying to put out as a children's book author.
I love that. Is that the most recent thing that you've been doing, or is the podcast the most recent?
Podcast is ongoing. It's about a year and a half old. And I think my children's books are just, I think I started those about a year ago. And to
Wow.
be honest, at one point, I think I sat down and wrote 3 books in one night. Like I stayed up all night and I just wrote. And then the next day, I worked on illustration, and I think I finished them in about 2 weeks. But it was just, I have these
Are you
moments.
illustrating the books also?
Yeah, I write them and I illustrate them.
Get out of here. That's
Yeah,
extraordinary.
thank you.
Is it like graphic? I mean, I've seen some of the images. So are you doing this like with graphic design, or is it mixed medium that you're able to do the illustrations?
Yeah, so I have a program that I purchased, and I use the graphics. Once I purchase them, then I can use them in whatever I want. So I just put it together and
Wow.
add and take away or whatever I want. I don't have any experience in graphic design at all. It's just something that I tried my hand with. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, but you are truly a Renaissance woman. I mean, this is amazing to me to be able to do the literary and the musical and the educational and the visual. And I just am fascinated with this because I think what I love about it most of all is the inspiration that your work generates. That
Mm,
you are so open and willing to talk about that you've had struggles and things that were made difficult for you, but in spite of that, if not with that, you have produced so much for others to benefit from. And I think I appreciate that so much that it's not, I mean, to be totally blunt, it's one thing for us as human beings to just survive this world, to just
yeah.
take care of ourselves. But I am so humbled at the fact that you are taking care of yourself and you are producing things for others to benefit from. It's just amazing. It's
Oh,
extraordinary.
thank you. I appreciate that. I actually used to be ashamed about doing so many things because I thought maybe people would judge me and say, pick something. Why are
Yeah.
you doing this? Why are you doing a podcast? Why are you writing books? And you're teaching, because I still teach privately. I teach voice and piano. And I was like, I don't want people to know that I do so many things. So like even when you asked me before to talk about myself, I was just like, I write books. I teach music. I was well, I do so many other things. And I'm just thankful that I have these gifts. Um, like I said, I was ashamed about it, but now I think I'm in a place where I'm just willing to do everything that I know how to do as long as I'm doing it well and effectively.
Yeah.
I'm willing to use all of the gifts that I have. So that's the place that I'm in now with it.
So let me ask, this is so painfully cliche, but what advice would you give others that may or may not necessarily be in a similar place, but just others that are trying to navigate, what should I be doing? What should I invest my time in and my talents in? Do you have any sort of sage advice of try this, do this in order to bring these things to fruition?
Well, I can tell you for me, like I have ideas all the time because I'm a creative. Some things pop into my head and then I forget about them the next day. But those things that kind of nag at me and they press on my heart and they don't let up, those are the things that I actually say, okay, let me go sit down in my workspace and try my hand at this. And if that thing is calling you, whatever's calling your name, I would say go for it.
Hmm.
Um, make sure that you're doing it. You don't want to do a halfway job at anything. Make sure that you do it well, perfect your craft, or get it to as close to perfect as possible. But go for it. Don't hold back. Don't think about what people are going to think about you. If it's something that makes you feel good and it's something that you feel like is a calling or a purpose, get a plan and execute it.
I love it.
Yeah, I
How
actually
did
just had a podcast episode about that, about us fulfilling our purpose in life, but making sure that you have a plan to do it,
yeah,
making sure that you identify what your passion is. All of those things can be really trying sometimes, but just really kind of feeling your way through to find out what it is that makes you happy, but also is fulfilling in a way that you are servicing others.
absolutely. I mean, I think it's so interesting to hear you say it that way, and not so ironically. I would argue that it's very poetic, but you are a poet. I think what you're describing is the role of an educator.
Yeah,
I mean, you have to know your talents and your strengths so that you can serve others. I think too many people forget that, and it's a weird thing that um, forgive me for talking about myself so much, but it's a weird thing that I feel like I'm struggling with even now. That I was just talking to some colleagues about this.
mhm.
I'm obviously grateful and proud of the things that I've accomplished and the things that I'm doing with my life, and I pray they lean into God's will and His purpose for me. And I think it would be foolish for someone to say that they're not happy or content or proud of the things that they're doing and that God has allowed them to do. So all that being said, that's my preface to say a lot of the joy that I get, it's less about my ego and more about me recognizing like I have worked to be here. And I am grateful to have these opportunities and these titles and this position, and I want to use it to serve others. That's what I want to do. But it's interesting to me how quickly, and I'm speaking specifically for myself, uh, that desire and the need to be able to serve others with what you've been blessed with gets skewed. And I'm able to sign in my emails that I send out, or with the classes that I teach. I have my students call me Professor Hanson, and it was a weird thing I had to navigate when I started teaching because we were going through like this new faculty orientation and kind of getting ready. And one of the things they said is, you're going to have to decide how are your students going to address you. And
Mhm.
I had several of my colleagues, and I think a lot of people experience this, like in the arts in general. Um, Educators are relatively casual, kind of depending on their role, and will usually develop relationships with students because they have students for so long. Elementary school music teacher has their students for 6 years.
Mhm.
High school students 4 years. So we know our students for so long that they can either become a first name basis or you get these very casual relationships. And I really struggled with that because I remember talking to some colleagues who would either go by their first name or they would go by like, Dr. Tim, like they would use these sort of colloquialisms and it'd be really casual. And I
Mhm.
remember kind of saying like, no, I'm Professor Hanson. Like that's my name. That's a title that I want you to use. And it has very little to do with my ego, but more for you to honor and recognize the work that I've done because I'm not just some person. I'm not just walking in here to do anything random. I have planned and prepared for the time that we're going to have together, and I want that to mean something.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because people were like, "Well, is it just authority?" I was like, "That's very little to do with authority because I don't want to be seen as an authority figure." But I
Mhm.
do want to be respected because I've lived my life. I'm still
Yeah.
living my life. I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
And I supervise student teachers, and I do that with them, and I talk to them about what a big deal it is that when you walk into that elementary school classroom, you know you're Miss Banks now.
Yeah.
Like there's a title to that, and it's significant for you to know that.
Mhm.
I'm not Christopher. I
Yeah.
don't call me Christopher. First of all, you don't know me like that. Second of all, like uh,
Yeah.
it's a matter of you understanding you have lived your life and you have done things, and we're in this situation in which we can learn from each other. I'm not just here to teach you. I'm going to learn who you are too. And anyway, forgive me for that rant, but I bring that all up because I don't think that I appreciate the example that you've given in this conversation of you are not, Devondra Banks, poet and author and speaker and mother. You are all those things, but you present yourself in such a way to say, I have these gifts and I want to share them. And
Yeah.
depending on the avenue, you can share those things. And all of that, again, this is a very long-winded preface to say, we were trying to find a way. I'm working on a project and trying to find a way to recruit people. And someone had said, well, you should email some people because it'll probably mean more coming from a professor at a university. And I just kind of rolled my eyes and I was like, first of all, I am happy to use a title if it's going to do something good. But at the same time, that's not why I teach college, is so that my voice or my experiences are somehow more important than someone else's.
Yeah.
I'm doing this primarily because I wanted to teach teachers, but I don't ever want to stop being an educator. To me,
Yeah.
being an educator was the greatest title that I could have. And it's just interesting to me. Again, I'm sort of feeling this out as I talk about it. It's interesting to me how that plays out with so many people. And it's very hard to navigate, and it's not the same for everyone. But I'm always sort of struck when I meet someone, for the first time, and how we engage with each other and how they represent themselves, like how they introduce themselves and how we wish to represent ourselves in the world, because I really do believe everybody has something to contribute to the world.
Absolutely.
Everybody, whether it's positive or negative, everybody has something to contribute. And we've all had fake people in our lives, and we know that they're trying to sow negativity. And how do they represent themselves? And
Yeah.
how are you able to approach them? And so I'm just, in this long-winded way, grateful that you're leading by example to show us sort of humility and understand the significance of being able to use our gifts, because it's definitely something that I'm aspiring to and trying to navigate the political, social, cultural dilemmas that we are all living through, to say, how can I be authentic to myself and share these things that I'm interested in, and to steal your words, to serve others so
Yes.
that others benefit from the things that I have to offer. I just absolutely love that. I'm so grateful for you sharing that.
Yeah, no problem. And thank you for that. And I just thought about something else I wanted to share. My dad, he's deceased. He passed away when I was in high school, but he was a Baptist pastor. And he used
Hmm.
to always tell us that your pulpit is wherever you set your feet. And
Hmm.
so for a long time, I was like, well, before I decided to leave the classroom, I said, well, I won't be a music educator anymore. And this is what I love to do. It was a big decision for me. It's not something I was like, see you, bye. I'm not worried about y'all. I knew that that's still something I wanted to do, but it's just amazing to me. Now, the other day I was looking at, okay, I had to write a bio. And I realized I'm still fulfilling my purpose. I'm still doing exactly what I said I wanted to do, but just not in this conventional way that I thought I had to do it. There's more than one
Yes.
skin a cat. So that's my other piece of advice to people. If you have these goals, just know that there's no one set way. If you have an idea that I want to do this, or I want to be a music educator, or I want to be a writer, or I want to counsel children, there's so many ways that you can do these things. So it doesn't have to be for another company. It doesn't have to be within these walls. I'm still teaching music. I'm still writing. I'm still able to teach my child privately and give him the education that he needs. And I'm still able to do exactly what I said I wanted to do for children and to be to children. Just not totally not in the way that I thought I would be doing it. But it's doable. So don't let that limit you in any kind of way or cripple your creativity. Go for it. Do whatever you want to do, how you want to do it, make it work. I know that income is important,
Hmm.
but it's doable. Make it happen.
Amen. I don't think there is a better way to finish this episode. I can't believe it's already been an hour.
I
I
know.
am, again, so grateful for your wisdom and the experiences you've shared. And yes, absolutely. Just thank you. There are no better words. Place your feet down and use that as your pulpit to share your gifts. And use, I hope for everyone that sees this, use Devondra as an example. And I know that you're very accessible. You're on social media, and I've
Yep.
put links to your website. So please feel free to support Devondra's literary works and stay connected with her, for those of you that are interested. Devondra, again and again, thank you. If you'll stay on, I want to give you a personal goodbye. But for everybody else, I'll go ahead and end the podcast. It was such an honor to be able to connect with Devondra Banks, an author and parent and music educator and singer and philanthropist and artist and poet, and it's just everything. The list continues, and I am so grateful for the things that she's contributing to this world and for this conversation today. I hope that it has inspired many of you to go out, do something, write something, paint something, sing something, do something and contribute to this world in service of others. I think as all educators are called to do. So thank you for watching. This will be archived in our YouTube playlist, and please come back next week for another conversation about the transformative power of the arts and education through the Falcon Feathers and our teacher talks. Thank you guys for watching.